Welcome to another conversation in People in Fundraising. This podcast features interviews with nonprofit professionals who discuss their career journeys, lessons learned, and enthusiasm for working in fundraising. And here's your host, the founder of People in Fundraising, Tim Wilson.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Season 2 of the People in Fundraising Conversations webcast. My name is Tim Wilson, and today I am really excited to welcome Zena Lum to our program, joining us from Boston, Massachusetts. Hi there, Zena.
Hi, Tim. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. I'm really excited for our conversation today. As a little bit of background, Zena and I got connected through a Season 1 guest, Jessica McNeill, and as part of the interview slate, you'll hear Zena talk about some affiliations she's had with nonprofit volunteer roles in the Boston area and how she and Jessica connected and the work that collectively many nonprofit professionals of color are striving for in Boston. So that little preamble. Zena is currently the director for the Center Support and Strategy at Harvard Kennedy School since July 1st. So congratulations on your new role.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, and Zena has been there for 2 years. I also really liked your LinkedIn bio where you talk about being a nonprofit professional who is passionate about education, equity, and social justice. So I look forward to hearing more about those topics in our conversation today.
Sounds great.
So Zena, thank you for your time. If you could elaborate on your current scope responsibilities at the Harvard Kennedy School, please.
Sure. So most people in the Boston area in the nonprofit field understand or are familiar with the term every tub on its own bottom, which explains the universe of Harvard University, where each of the units really are responsible for their own fundraising and budgets, with a little bit of central support, but much more on the independent side than on the centralized side, decentralized versus centralized. Yeah. At the Kennedy School, we're almost a microcosm of that universe in that the Kennedy School is made up of 12 different academic research centers. And when I first joined 2 years ago, I did join as a traditional major gifts role with a focus on a West Coast portfolio. In the 2 years since I've been here, a couple of my more seasoned colleagues ended up moving to the West Coast, and it did not make sense for a Cambridge-based West Coast portfolio manager to add to the mix. So looking at my past, which does not include higher ed, this is my first time in a higher ed role. I really had a lot of experience in the .org world, both directly as well as an executive search director with Lindauer, which I did for 10 years before joining Harvard. They recognized that my strength was really being able to take a mission and align it to the work of either development more generally or more specifically to individual interests. And so they thought, let's create this new role, Director of Development for Center Support and Strategy, to see how ARD, which is the acronym for Alumni Relations and Resource Development at the Kennedy School, to see how our division can be more effective partners and more efficient partners to the demands of all of these very independent centers. So 5 of the 12 are now centers that I work with directly.
Oh, terrific. That sounds like an exciting position.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing how it unfolds.
Very good. Well, thank you for that explanation. What I would love to do now is let's rewind the chronological clock and talk about with our audience just how you entered the nonprofit field, and you've been in Boston for a good number of years, and I'd love to just hear about roles and places you worked at, please.
Sure. So I moved to Boston in 1993. So it's been almost 30 years. It'll be 30 years in a couple of months, actually.
Oh, nice.
And I would say that this would be where my professional career in fundraising began. I bet you could have a really fun drinking game if you asked your audience members to drink every time they hear a nonprofit or fundraiser say, how many people actually decided to go into fundraising or people just fell into fundraising, and I raised my hand being part of that camp. So I grew up in upstate New York, went to school in DC, moved to Atlanta, where I tried to pursue more glamorous careers in entertainment, fashion and entertainment. I decided that I liked a lot of the skills that I picked up in those industries in my first couple of years out of school. A lot of the public interaction, understanding what motivates people to buy or to listen or to pursue or to come out. I liked the artist relations piece of things and meeting some really cool people, including like Blur when they were nobody.
Oh, wow.
But I wasn't thrilled with the industry in and of itself. And I also miss the Northeast where I'm from. So I had a friend who lived kind of central between Boston and New York and thought I'll just move there and start looking for a job. Worked through a placement agency in Boston who sent me on an interview to the New England Aquarium. They said it was a development job and that they were getting ready to build a new plaza. And I thought, okay, I'll wear a hard hat and carry some blueprints and maybe get some coffee for the planner, because that's what development is, right? You're building. And I walk into the interview and it's this very lovely older woman from Smith College in her Talbot's outfit. And I'm thinking, she does not look like she's in construction. And people, this is 1993, people, there was no Google. I can't look up what development is. So I faked it through the interview, and it must have worked, because I was actually still just over the border near the Berkshires. So by the time I drove back to where I was staying, there was a job offer on the answering machine. So again, answering machine, not voicemail. And I took the job and moved to Boston and stayed at the aquarium for 6.5 years, where I really, credit, it's the luck of timing and the luck of circumstance, but I learned so much in that job. I started as an admin assistant. By the time I left, I was managing the membership program. We were on the cusp of, technology really making a change in our field. So it was a really formative experience for me. And then from there, I did a couple more stints with other well-known cultural institutions, Museum of Science, WGBH. I took a little bit of a detour out of private.org world to work a little bit with Boston Public Schools. For a couple of years. It again, sort of an experimental role in that they were trying to build an internal in-district office of philanthropy and advancement, as opposed to relegating it to an external 501c3. That could be a whole nother conversation, Tim. And then after that experiment, which I will fully admit was not fully successful, had had episodic success in it, but the overall experiment was not successful. I ended up in executive search with Lindauer Global, which many of which at the time was Lois Lindauer Searches, and many people are familiar with Lindauer as an executive search firm that works specifically in the nonprofit field. So that too, I thought it would be a couple of years, lick my wounds, figure out what I want to do. And I ended up staying for 10 because I loved it, loved the people, loved the work, loved the opportunity to really learn the broader landscape of fundraising and development and advancement across, the entire sector. The pandemic hit. So contracts dried up, difficult decisions had to be made, and I ended up getting laid off. And it was, while it was a door closing, it was a reopening of the door back into frontline fundraising. And after a brief stint, once again, related to Boston Public Schools, I ended up here at the Kennedy School. And again, my first job in higher ed.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you for that explanation and the walkthrough of your career. I just had a thought as I was listening to you talk, and you mentioned having several roles that were more experimental in nature, or at least at the outset. And I wondered if those opportunities, if they were presented to you based on both your experience in generally, but also specifically, as you mentioned, before you got into development, you were working in fashion and creativity and with musicians, so that really creative environment. So am I off base on that? There may have been some synergy there, or
I may be skipping ahead a little bit to one of your questions that you very thoughtfully shared with me in advance. I've reached a point in my life where when I look back, I should not be at all surprised. I've ended up where I've ended up.
Yeah.
In high school, I was a co-founder as a junior in high school with a number of seniors in a community service club where we were fundraising and putting together, meal baskets and things like that, for our school community.
Yeah.
That led to opportunities because administrators liked what we were doing for me to take part in some leadership extracurricular activities. So, throughout my life, there's been this recurring theme of service that I should just, again, not be surprised I'm in the nonprofit world.
Oh, I love that. I love that, you have that insight, and, you can track it back to, formative years. Very cool. Zena, I'd love to hear you talk a bit about the many nonprofit affiliations you have. So in addition to the career trajectory you just shared with us on your LinkedIn, and as we've prepared for today's conversation, I've just been really impressed with the energy and the involvement you have with numerous organizations.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I love that about people who work in this field, that they still intentionally make time outside of work and personal, and maybe some people blend it all together. But you mentioned before we started recording, working with women of color in fundraising, woke, and there were another acronym or two. So I'd love for you to just talk us through some of those volunteer affiliations and what draws you to these missions, please.
So the two professional organizations I belong to are Women in Development of Greater Boston, and I've been involved with them since pretty much from the get-go. It was an organization my first boss at the New England Aquarium belonged to, and that was where my familiarity with that particular org began. Women of Color in Fundraising and Philanthropy is a pandemic-born organization. I met its founder, Yolanda Johnson, at an AADO case conference in diverse philanthropy and fundraising in Indianapolis in 2019. For those who don't know, AADO is the African American Development Officers, and CASE is the Council for Advancement Services and Education, I think.
Council for the Advancement and Support, I believe, of Education.
Yeah.
Lots of acronyms. So
lots of acronyms, alphabet soup.
Totally fine.
So, and she and I connected, and she mentioned she was about to launch this group, and she asked if I would serve on the advisory council. So I've been involved with that organization since its founding a few years ago. Both organizations are looking at engaging our professionals in the organization broadly, and through my work at Lindauer, and even going back again to my earliest days in Boston, when I was asked to sit on a diversity committee, and it was the first committee at the aquarium where staff and trustees sat as equals, not as opposites. I learned so much about the community of Boston through that experience because of the chair of that committee. And that in combination, this is sort of a blending of all things. So from a professional perspective, I was gaining and learning about the challenges of being a person of color in this field, how we as search directors might address that, how we as professionals might look at that with our peers and with our organizations. On a personal level, I've lived in the city of Boston in the South End since 2004, and even previous to that had lived in the North End, and had a first tour of duty in the South End as well. South End, for those who aren't familiar with the neighborhoods of Boston, is one of the more diverse neighborhoods, certainly subject to gentrification, and I can't say I haven't benefited from that. But as a nonprofit professional and with a husband who works for the state, we're not a high income family, and my son went to Boston Public Schools. So even before I worked for BPS, I was familiar with the challenges, or learning to understand the challenges facing urban education. So all of these experiences have been very formative and informative for me as to where my strengths and skills and talents lie as far as a profession is concerned, and how they can be applied, as well as how they can be applied in my civic life. Working with other organizations, working with organizations that I believe in, and working for organizations, there's no question. There are a couple where it's like friends who have asked me to come on board, and I've come on board because of the person-to-person connection. But that's not to say that the mission isn't important to me, and the work that they do isn't important to me. And if I can help advance that, I want to do so. Yeah,
well, that is fantastic. I'm just wondering, since you were with women of color in fundraising and philanthropy from the beginning, the origin of it, and you were placed on the advisory council from the get-go, did you have particular say or influence in how that organization started, and reaching out any specific responsibilities about recruiting members and such?
Not directly. But I was, as a member of the advisory council, I was certainly consulted in terms of things like panel discussions, asked to participate as a panel, asked to refer panelists. On occasion, or actually, I think one of the most formative program, and this is how Jessica McNeill and I got together. Not quite a year into its formation, Yolanda wanted to launch a mentorship program. So that more senior professionals could be a resource for those who, for young professionals of color, or even mid-career or other seniors who are just looking for other people who would understand where they were coming from, what their experiences were. And the first year she created the program, she was oversubscribed from the get-go.
Wow.
There was just a hunger for this service. And
Yeah.
so she initially asked all of the advisory council members if we would volunteer to mentor 2 women, and it was a low lift. It's an hour every other month, right, with
Yeah.
each one. So it's 12 hours of your life over the course of a year. When she was oversubscribed, she asked if some of us would take on some additional mentees.
Mhm.
So this program launched at the time when I was between jobs, because I had been laid off from Lindauer. I was looking for a job. I had a lot of time. I thought this was a great way to keep some skin in the game and to continue to keep a finger on the pulse of how things are going in our industry from a more personal perspective.
Yeah.
And I signed up and took on 16 mentees.
Oh, wow.
Again, it sounds like a lot, and I don't want to downplay what I took on and continue to take on, but at the same time, it's 2 hours a week. It's 8 women a month on average, right? And the reach that you can have, the opportunity to expand my own knowledge, my own network was tremendous. So there was a lot of value for me to be part of this program and to help ensure that the momentum kept up and we didn't have to start a wait list. And so the first year I did 15, the second year I did another 15, and many of them were repeat customers. And this year I did narrow it down now that I'm employed full-time at the Kennedy School, and I have 10, I think.
Oh, okay. Excellent.
In fact, I'm actually meeting with several of them. So several of them are in New York. This is a virtual program. We Zoom for the most part. Jessica and I are lucky that we can potentially meet in person if our schedules align. But I'm meeting with 7 of my mentees from the greater New York area this weekend when I go to New York City for a girls trip. So
dynamite.
Yolanda will be joining us there too. So I'm really excited this Saturday.
That is so cool.
I'll be meeting some of these women for the first time in person after mentoring them for like 2.5 years. So,
oh, wow. That's wonderful.
It's really cool.
That is great. And really, that's inspiring. So thank you for sharing that. My follow-up question, it's question 4, Zena, on the sheet here, because you talked about, and I try to find or listen to linkages between one answer and the lead into the other one. You mentioned you wanted to keep the momentum going for the mentor-mentee program, and the importance of mentoring women of color at any stage in careers. As you reflect, maybe drawing from the mentorship program or that plus the volunteering and other developments, are you optimistic about the future of the social impact nonprofit world becoming and being more representative of our society at large? And I want to use a quote from a season 1 guest that you've mentioned, and I did too, Neda Jimenez, a former coworker of mine. She called this association in Boston of nonprofit leaders of color a beautiful rainbow of colors. So how would you respond to that question about, are we moving in the right direction and meaningfully, thoughtfully becoming more representative?
So Tim, I was really looking forward to this question because I dug into some data.
Oh, good.
And I am going to be very potentially controversial. And I want people to withhold from reacting and really processing. But, you shared a statistic that 59.5% of people who work in nonprofits are Caucasian.
Yeah.
That is not That means 39.5% who work in nonprofits. And this is not the fundraising field. This is the nonprofit sector at large, which I looked up. It's about 24 million or 14% of our workforce.
Wow.
So if that means 40.5% are people of color, that is almost a direct reflection of our US Census.
Oh.
If you look at our US Census, I looked this up, the white population that is non-Hispanic and non-Latino is 58.9.
Wow.
So 59.5, I mean, we're talking bare percentages.
Yeah.
And if you look at individual ethnicities, the Asians, solely identifying Asian population is 6.3%, 7.2% are in the nonprofit field.
Wow.
If you look at the combined Native American Pacific Islander pool of our population's 1.6%, we're 2.6% in the nonprofit field. What I want to say is that in terms of representation as a field, maybe not in fundraising, I wasn't able to dig up those numbers, but more broadly as a nonprofit sector, and I don't think that should be surprising if you think about what the communities that the nonprofit sector has traditionally served. Representation is there. What we need to do is, and the reason why I don't want this to be controversial is because I don't want this to be an excuse to say, oh, we can lift, we can put on the brakes a little bit. I think what we need to do is actually shift gears, right? Because it's no longer necessarily about representation, although I think we can do much better within different silos. But I also don't want the silos to take away from the opportunity to create synergy as a single voice of 40% of people of color who represent this country to move the profession forward. So I do think it's time to shift gears. I do think we need to emphasize equity. We need to emphasize inclusion. We need to emphasize belonging. But I'm optimistic because we've come this far already.
Sure. Yeah. Well, thank you for doing the research and telling the data with that narrative. I think that was really important. And
yeah, I was just going to say there's a practice in philanthropy that I hear more and more often as a fundraiser, which is we need to stop our narrative of fundraising from a deficit perspective, what we don't have. I think the same needs to happen from how we look at our profession and who's in our profession. I think we need to shift the paradigm from the deficit and start leveraging the strengths and understanding and build upon those strengths. And how can we continue to make sure the needle and the path is forward and not backwards, especially given the political challenges in our landscape.
Definitely. I like that reframing, going from the deficit mindset and you mentioned the 40% of people of color in nonprofits and channeling the experiences and the skills, going forward.
Yeah, again, it's not an either or. There's no monolith in terms of ethnicities, even within ethnicities.
Yeah.
But there has to be a balance between where are shared commitments, shared values, where can we leverage synergies in order to, rising tide lifts all boats.
Yeah.
So such tropes, I know,
but they stick for a reason. So
right.
Yeah. Well, fantastic. Thank you. And I would love to be involved, or circle back with you and Nada about particulars of how we are collectively moving the work forward. And and keeping the momentum going and the synergies strong, so that we are moving from that deficit mindset to the strengths.
Love that.
Yeah.
Love that.
Excellent. We have about 10 minutes left in our program. I would love to get through maybe one or two more questions, Zena. So I don't want to trip people up, my guests. So we'll go right into question 5, which does a particular moment or experience come to mind where you thought fundraising suits you well in your career?
I think that goes back to that little bit of an anecdote I shared earlier, which is you reach a certain point, you reach the midpoint of your life, and maybe it's the midpoint or the beginning of the final phase of your career. And you kind of go, how did I get here?
Yeah.
What did I do? How did I get here? And when I look back to even non-fundraising related experiences, so not community, yes, I helped found a community service club in my high school, but there were other formative experiences in my high school, in college, early in my career, that all obviously contribute to who I am, contributed to who you are.
Definitely.
And it just, it just feels like I'm where I'm supposed to be right now.
Yeah, that is wonderful. I'm glad to hear that. And as you were beginning your reply, you talked about this stage of your career in particular, and the mentor. I was thinking about the mentoring that you've done, and the book by David Brooks, a New York Times columnist, called The Second Mountain.
I've heard of that. Yes.
Yeah.
I haven't read it yet, but I have heard of it.
Yeah, I really found it valuable when I read it. I think I read it during the pandemic, so it's been a while. But and also Arthur Brooks, he's a faculty member.
Yes, he's at the Kennedy School.
That's
Yeah,
right.
The Leadership and Happiness Laboratory.
Yes, and you may be aware of this quote then, but again, I think it really connects with what you were saying about mentoring and being at this stage in your career. And I'm going to paraphrase a bit of his quote, but it was something to the effect of get comfortable in the second or the back half, as he called it, of your career, sharing your experiences. And that can be a primary driver of how people work as they're in this later stage or second stage of careers. So I think that's, for me, I've been in the field for almost 25 years, and I feel like I'm an example of that with this podcast.
100%.
Yeah, not so much me sharing expertise, but I love having people on like you that are talking about their passions and how they stay connected and involved. So yeah. So speaking of passions, maybe this can be our last question here, Zena. So again, as you put on your LinkedIn profile, you're passionate about education, equity, and social justice. And you've done a great job articulating some of those significant themes in your answer. How do those 3 elements come together, either through your volunteering or through perhaps with your current role at Harvard Kennedy School, please?
First of all, it's such a privilege to be at a place like the Kennedy School, right? I mean, I alluded to the fact that I worked briefly in the public sector at Boston Public Schools, and I value that experience for a lot of things, but I also value it for recognizing that I personally am not cut out to be in the public sector. I love being at the Kennedy School because it's sort of that intersection between practice, academia, research. I get to support the next generation of leadership through my fundraising. And I also get to do so in a place that is looking deeply into those questions, policies, and inequities that I am passionate about and how we address them in our public lives. And it's at a global scale here at the Kennedy School. So I would say that in some ways, this current role I've been in for the past few years is a confluence of all of the personal and professional experiences I've had. And I'm still learning. Again, it's as much as I learned a lot in my role in the public sector, I learned a lot in my role as an executive search director. I'm learning a lot as a higher ed professional.
Yeah.
And so I'm a lifelong learner, so there's nothing here that is not welcome, good and bad, right? What you learn about yourself, what you learn about a place, what you learn about bureaucracy and higher ed courts. But in the end, this is the right place for me to have the impact on the public sector that I'd like to have, that doesn't involve me being in the public sector.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Yes. Well, I love that image of this being a confluence for you. And also, you're able to continue your own personal and professional learning. That is so important.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, this time has gone really quickly, and I want to be respectful of the rest of your day. But Zena, this has been just a great conversation today. Thank you for your preparation and the grace, the insights you brought to our Q&A today. So thank you.
Thank you, Tim. This has been so much fun, and I really appreciate what you're doing and what you're contributing to our profession as well. And this has been an exciting conversation for me too.
Well, thank you. I'm honored. And I really would love to be committed to following up with you about, I'm in Utah, but
I was born in Utah.
Oh, you were?
Yeah, my dad did his postdoc work there.
Oh, okay. Excellent.
So, yeah.
At the University of Utah or Utah State?
No, he worked, I'm not quite sure where. So
okay.
Full confession, I lived there the first 6 months of my life, so I don't have a lot of memory of Utah, but I understood he worked in pharmaceuticals. He was a chemist. He has his PhD in chemistry.
Oh, okay.
He did his postdoc work there. I don't know with which organization. I was born in Logan.
Oh, okay.
Makes a difference. And then shortly after I was born, he got his job at Eastman Kodak, which is what brought us to upstate New York.
Oh, okay. Oh, really cool.
Yeah. Going back to what you were saying, even just being the child of immigrants, I think has some bearing, direct or indirect, into my understanding and my passion for being in the nonprofit sector. So yeah. You can go back to the very roots.
That's true. Yes. Yeah. Well, thank you. I appreciate that add-on at the end. Yeah, I think there's something, fundamental in those formative years and even before we were alive, that some stuff just is ingrained in us.
Yeah, my parents were able to come to the States because of the largesse, generosity of others. They came on scholarships. My dad got his PhD from Baylor. My mom got her master's in library science at Southwestern. So I owe a lot to the great state of Texas. Say what you will about it. But yeah, so family history.
Absolutely. Yes. Well, dynamite. Thank you so much for your time today, Zena. You can find our conversation later this fall on the peopleinfundraising.com website, as well as on LinkedIn and on YouTube. And again, it's been a real treat. So thank you.
It's been a treat for me as well. And I'm always open to LinkedIn requests. So if people are listening to this podcast and they want to find me on LinkedIn, please do.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Zena.
Thank you, Tim. Take care.
You as well. Thank you.